Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to our Friday night Milk and Meat live stream. I'm Sean Griffin, your host, and this is Kingdom in Context. And tonight, we have a wonderful Milk and Meat guest that's going to join us for a fun discussion. We'll probably be bouncing around all throughout the scriptures. This is Mr. Zen Garcia. And before I bring him on and introduce him, I just want to say hello real quick to everyone in the chat that has already joined us. Looks like we've got a pretty lively chat already going. And I just want to say thank you for everyone that showed up tonight to hang out with us and to join us in this discussion. Kingdom Truther, NEG, Franken Beans, Dally Jacobson. Thank you for being here, everybody. Josh Patzik, Coffee Beans, and Josh Hardy said, Donna Flinky. There's quite a few people. I'm scanning through the comments. And Annette Herrera, thank you for being here. Good to see everyone. Jeremiah 15:16 is back. Andy Pandy's back. And let me see here. Bill Craddock is back. Thanks for joining us. And there's too many for me to go through right off the bat because the chat's been going for a while. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please try to, as always, we're going to take periodic breaks throughout. This is a little bit different. Normally, I do the slides and then we'll do Q&A. But this time, in the midst of the discussion that Zen and I are having, we'll stop very briefly to take one or two questions from the audience, and then pick back up with the discussion with Zen. So, you guys, if you do have a question that you want to get seen, please make sure that it's a full sentence and that it's coherent, and that so we know what you're trying to ask. And please put it in all caps so that myself or the other moderators are able to see it quickly from amongst all the other chat conversation, and you have a better chance of it getting asked. So I appreciate everyone for please abiding in that, and that way it'll be much better. So I'm going to bring on Mr. Zen Garcia. And sir, welcome. It's good to have you on Milk and Meat live stream here on Kingdom in Context.
Glad to be here. It's a privilege, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if everyone's not familiar, Zen, you are the owner and executive editor of Sacred Word Publishing, and you're an author and a speaker.
I'm a co-owner. My children are involved, and they actually mostly run Sacred Word Publishing. I just kind of do a lot of the writing and editing of the material, but they pretty much run everything.
You help them with the content.
Yeah.
Nice.
I just focus on writing books, and so which is what I enjoy doing. And so I'm focused on the research, and they handle the business aspects and all of that. And so really they're the owners.
Awesome. So you guys, if you've never checked out his site, go check out Sacred Word Publishing, and they've got a lot of material there to go over and look at for consideration. So tonight, as many of you have already seen from the thumbnail that you clicked on this video, we're going to be discussing the serpent seed theory that Zen Garcia promotes. Now, before we did the show, I reached out to our brother Zen and I said, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this. I personally do not hold this theory, but I know that you do. And so I'd love for us to discuss it in front of people. And he agreed. And we both agreed that this is not a salvational issue, but it is an issue that a lot of people talk about amongst the body of believers. And there's a lot of questions about it. So I thought it would be beneficial for everyone for us to actually have the discussion in front of everyone. So Zen, again, I really appreciate you joining me to do this.
Oh yeah, no, I actually appreciate the invitation, because with regard to this topic, yes, I do know that is very controversial and it is contrary to majority opinion. But I, again, having researched this for a very long time, do believe it to be biblical. But I would rather come together with somebody like yourself to discuss the issue rather than just get judged, condemned, and criticized for believing it and teaching it. And I appreciate your willingness to join me in dialogue to actually go through the scriptures and to actually study it out and go chapter by chapter and verse by verse. So
yeah, you may have seen, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Kingdom in Context, but we have 2 full seasons of Honor of Kings. It's a special show we do with Ken Heidebrecht from Hanging on His Words. And all we do is look at the apocryphal books and the texts that either used to be in the scriptures and been taken out over time, or were never put into the Bible, the American canon that we have, but were put into other canons like the Eastern Orthodox, Ethiopian canon, or even sometimes the Armenian canon. So we are familiar with the types of comments that you can get by looking into books and texts that the average American is not familiar with. And it's definitely you just have to, it's one of those deals you get to practice, treating it like thick skin and a soft heart is what A.W. Tozer used to say. So,
well, I do appreciate that aspect of your work as well. For those that are not familiar with the work that we do, we study, look at, read, examine very thoroughly much of what is considered extra biblical, apocryphal, pseudepigraphal, and a lot of the work that we do in publishing and releasing for public consideration are books that have not yet been in print. Materials, ancient sources, ancient extra biblical, extra canonical sources that most people are not familiar with, and a lot of the different compilations of books. For instance, the collected works of Enoch, Yahushua Christ, the infancy, early childhood, and lost years, the Great Commission series. These are all compilations of manuscripts which people are not familiar, but that are available for study. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that I spend the majority of my time doing is studying the extra biblical material. And so I appreciate that about your work as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to me, especially when I start realizing that there's so much content in the books that the average American is not familiar with that Christians say of the second century would have wholeheartedly been familiar with, that answers
Right.
so many questions to what we have today. And I think a part of that process of time, as some books were excluded, some books were included, and then those even, that particular canon changed from year to year, depends on who the new canon meeting, basically,
Right.
the canon conventions that they would have. Like you over time, you have more and more opportunity within the text and then the storyline to find a reason to have questions that cause division. And I think part of that process is a part of why we have so many denominations in the United States amongst the
Absolutely.
church.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, folks, without further ado, we'll just jump right into it. Zen, you're welcome to screen share if you would like. You let me know if you want to do that. Otherwise, I can pull up something for you to show while you're talking.
Yeah, no, I will do that. I'm not familiar with this particular platform, and so just bear with me.
Should be a menu bar at the bottom below our screen.
Okay, share screen. Okay, I see that.
There you go. And if you're wanting to share any kind of audio, make sure to click the box that says share audio also before you finalize the
Okay,
share
no,
screen.
I won't be doing that. All right. And so I just thought, we should study by going through the text beginning with Genesis 2:25, and that we can read through the narrative together and discuss, going through to Genesis 3:17, and that should be really the foundation for what we get into.
Okay.
And then, of course, I look at the Hebrew, and when we get into other texts that are also King James, like Matthew 13, we'll look at the Greek as well. But just going to the story, and I'm not going to bring up all the words that I have looked up, because just for time's sake, but you can see my screen, you can see what I have up. And so
actually, I can't see your screen.
Oh, you can't?
I was going to say, are you trying to share screen right now?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. It's not showing me, for whatever reason, it's not showing the share screen. I don't know if it's because there's 3 people in our broadcast tonight.
So you don't see the word file, the Serpent Seed teaching?
I do not, no. I'm trying to give the option to show our 2 video boxes next to the actual share screen option, and it's not pulling up anything from your Windows.
Okay, because when I look at it, it is sharing, but
Okay, let me check the actual YouTube and see if it's not showing me anything.
your entire screen, application window, or Chrome tab. Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go. There we go. Let me add this.
I
And
just
then,
didn't
there we
select.
go.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right. So the first thing is looking at Genesis 2:25, and we start there. We see that it says, "And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed." And so, and I do have, for those that are not familiar, I have all three of the parallel accounts as far as the King James, the Septuagint, and the Aramaic Targum. And for people that are not familiar with the Targum simply means translation, and it is the oldest translation of the Hebrew Torah into a different language. And it dates back to the diaspora, the rebuilding of the temple in the 4th century BC. It's also 200 years older than the Septuagint. And so when it comes to examining the oldest translation and going back to the most ancient source, the Aramaic Targum is that which one should be examining and studying. And I know that most people are not familiar with it, but it is the one that I study the most when it comes to the first 5 books of Moshe, the Pentateuch, because initially the Targum, that's all there was, was the first 5 books. Those were the Torah, the law for the Israelites, and this is the account that they also studied from was the Aramaic, because after the diaspora, they assimilated Aramaic as their colloquial language, and then when they returned back to the land and rebuilt the temple and began to do the worship and devotion again, Aramaic is what they had to translate the Torah, the Hebrew Torah, into in order for the Israelites to be able to read, follow, and study along. And they read the Hebrew side by side with the Aramaic.
And you think that's the process that we see happening in Nehemiah chapter 8 with Ezra?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and even Daniel and Jeremiah, you see that those manuscripts are also in Aramaic.
Cool.
All right, so continuing, we go to Genesis 3. And now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And so just a couple of words that we should look at here. You shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. The word eat there is the Hebrew word akal, and it also can mean to lay with or enjoy something as good fortune, sexual pleasures, or the fruit of good or evil actions. And even the word touch, naga, in the Hebrew means to lie with a woman. You can see that right there, right?
I can't see it, and that's in addition to all the other uses of that word, depending on
Right.
the application
Yeah.
of context. For example, like it says right after to lie with a woman, by implication to reach, as if you're reaching after a woman, or is it to
Right.
violently strike a woman?
Yeah, I'm just emphasizing, specifics.
Oh, I
But
see.
yeah, I
Okay.
have the whole. If you can see my screen, you can see that I have the whole word definition
Yeah,
there. But
I'm looking on the actual YouTube feed, and we can see your screen share, so I think we're good.
okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll go down to Genesis 3:6. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat, and the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons, and heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden. In the cool of day, Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. The Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee that thou was naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldst not eat? All right, let me speak about what I believe is actually occurring here and how I interpret the story with regard to them eating of this fruit from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Initially, I'm sure you're familiar with the primary Adamic literature, the first and second books of Adam and Eve, and how it speaks
Yes.
about they were bright-natured beings, and that in the story when they ate they lost basically what was their light vestures, their immortality, and then they transitioned into a bestial form. They had not ever experienced even darkness or the sun. They didn't know cold or heat. They had never eaten anything. They did not even have digestive systems. They had never drank water. And so they were completely immortal in aspect, and they did not know what it was to be in a bestial body. You guys are familiar with that, right?
I am familiar with the books of Adam and Eve, and that's actually one of the apocryphal texts that I struggle to get on board with for a variety of reasons. Some of the reasons you mentioned, because of the way of the nature of how Adam and Eve are described in comparison to the what we study as far as the nature of the resurrection bodies that we were promised to receive versus the earthly bodies Adam and Eve were made out of. So that's something that we're actually looking at reviewing on Honor of Kings season 3. But I don't want to give away like an entire 5 or 6 episodes, depending on how we come to the conclusion once we finish studying it line by line. So that's my first initial thought after having read multiple times the books of Adam and Eve and looked through them. But we do plan to study those line by line. So for the sake of our conversation tonight, I'm just gonna, we're going to go with the premises that you're putting forward from the books that you're wanting to talk about.
Okay,
So,
well,
yeah.
when you read those manuscripts, it's clear that they had an immortal aspect, and they were not yet into um, mortal embodiment until they ate from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And where it says that in the day that ye eat thereof, you shall die, that when they did eat, and I do believe that it was a fruit that they ate from this tree, and that when they ate it and they touched it, that they took on what was an animalistic nature. They were
Okay.
they fell from what was an immortal to what is a mortal embodiment. And so, in my opinion, that's also when their genitalia appeared, because after eating this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, their eyes were opened and they knew that they were naked. And then they sewed fig leaves to cover their genitals. It's also my opinion that after eating this fruit and then taking on this mortal aspect, when their genitals appear, that's when the serpent beguiling Eve, and as we'll look at 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 2 and 3, where it speaks about Eve having been a chaste virgin, but then after the serpent beguiled her, that she had lost her purity, her virginity, her chastity.
So
And
then you're equating the reaching out to take the fruit in both senses of its possible application. You're saying that it's both to physically eat and consume, but it's also a dual meaning that they not only ate, but then after they ate, they had the ability to literally lie in sexual nature
right,
with the serpent. Okay, I just
yes,
want to make sure I understand. And
yeah.
also clarifying for the audience, because I see some questions in the chat, and I just want to make sure people are following us.
Yeah, and we can answer. I'll be glad to answer any questions that people have, but let me set the premise here
Sure.
first. And so, so after they eat this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the serpent beguiles Eve, and in my opinion, impregnates her with Cain, and that's why it says in the scriptures that Cain was of the wicked one, and we'll look at closer at those particular words and passages as well, but we'll go through Genesis 3 first. And then when she gave the fruit to Adam to eat, and I believe that act was him repeating what he had seen with the serpent, and that this is when she was impregnated with Abel, and that's why Eve is the mother of all the living. And then when we get to the punishments, which are shortly after these verses, you'll see that God tells the serpent that he's going to put enmity between his seed and her seed. And so Cain was of his seed and Abel was of Adam's seed. And that's why we see the enmity playing out. And the curse on the serpent is that there's going to be enmity between their bloodlines. And then we see in the next verse, which we'll get there here in a second, but that Eve is cursed to bear children in sorrow. And that's the punishment for her having eaten this fruit, which everybody believes or equates to be an apple. But I believe it to have been like grapes or some kind of cluster of grapes, and also symbolic of some kind of sexual connotation.
Because doesn't First Enoch describe it as a cluster of grapes or similar to?
Yeah, I believe so. And there's
Yeah.
also other stories that also describe it as a cluster of grapes as well.
Yeah. And so from what you were just paraphrasing and setting as a foundational idea, you actually clarified something that I had heard, because without, there's so many different arguments that people come up with or misconceptions of what the actual argument is for the serpent seed theory. And one of them you just clarified, which is the idea that Adam, from your perspective, you're saying that Adam took of the fruit and then copied what you think happened between the serpent and Eve, and then Adam turned around and copied that with Eve. Whereas the misconception I've heard is that Adam did that with the serpent, and there was some sense of homosexual nature relationship. But you're saying that's not what you're teaching or what you think.
No,
you think Adam just took that fruit and did what he saw happening to Eve.
Right, because the results of his eating with Eve was that Abel would be born of that conception.
Okay.
And
okay.
so,
so
you're
saying like a dual conception in the same
right
in the same day
called,
or time period.
Well, they were twins, and it's called heteropaternal superfecundation, which just means that fraternal twins were born of two different fathers, which happens even in this day and age. But
it does happen. Yeah, I think they're on Maury Povich.
Yeah, right.
Not the father. You are the father.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to share something here from the Targum real quick before we go past. It says in this verse as well, and the eyes of both were enlightened, and they knew that they were naked, divested of the purple robe in which they had been created. And so it's my opinion that, again, they were clothed in what was a bright nature before having eaten this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that in doing so they were put under the authority of death, which was the loss of their immortal nature and their placement into fallen flesh form, which is why when we are redeemed by Christ, he rectifies the fall and restores us to our first estate. They then were taken back up into paradise. And paradise, where they originally fell from, is in the third heaven, as Paul speaks about in 2 Corinthians, that paradise is in the third heaven. And you see confirmation of this in the book of Enoch and other places as well, the vision of Paul and other things. And so it's my opinion that after these punishments, which we're about to go into, then they were banished here to the earth, and that the fallen angels had already been cast out and were here as well. And so looking at a few verses here, and here's one from the book of Adam and Eve, which talks about that as well. And because at that time they were filled with the grace of a bright nature, and they had not hearts turned towards earthly things. And so, again, the primary Adamic literature without a doubt shows that they were immortal in aspect before having eaten this fruit and being tempted and having fallen. The word there for pleasant even has something to do with lusting and being desiring, and we see that with these other verses as well as were with desired. The word shamad, it is the attraction greatly below, things of that nature. And even the word for eat can also, as we said, to mean lay with a woman, enjoy sexual pleasures. The word fruit, it has representative of offspring, children, progeny. So let's go into
There's a
now.
quick question we have in the chat, and this
Yeah,
this
sure.
one shouldn't take too long. Can you see it on the screen? I just put it on the screen for us. Do you see the question? You switched windows? I'll just read it to you. It's okay. I
Yeah,
apologize.
okay, sure.
Someone is asking, Griffin Fire 101 is asking, wouldn't he be a giant then? And I'm assuming he's referring to Cain, the birth of Cain. And this is the assumption that an angel taking a woman, there's immediate offspring would be a giant. We actually talk in Honor of Kings, first season, episode 2, how there's several different ways to make a giant, and it doesn't have to be guaranteed. But what would you say about that, Zen?
Well, in my opinion, Cain was different in appearance, but with regard to being of giant stature, it's my opinion that Adam and all of the first 10 generations of humanity are what we would consider to be giants, that they had very much longer lifespans and that they were very much larger in stature than normal humanity, especially post-flood humanity. But it does speak about in the Gospel of Bartholomew that Adam was 60 cubits tall. And so, whatever you can take that for, he was a very much larger stature than, and again, the living almost 1,000 years that also differentiated the first 10 generations of Adam and humanity in stature and size from post-flood humanity and lifespan.
So you said the Gospel of Bartholomew claims Adam was 60 cubits tall, and I'm guessing that's the cubit, like the Egyptian royal cubit, which is what, 20 to 25 inches.
Well, they say that it equates to 90 feet, so
that'd be about 18 inches then.
Yeah,
per cubit. Interesting. Okay.
But with regard to Cain, and I will bring this up as well, is that he was what is called seraphic in appearance, which means that he had a snake-like, a serpentine, a reptilian nature to his bloodline. And so that we see is spoken about as far as with the devil. He's called in Revelation 12 that ancient dragon, that old serpent, and that Christ refers to even the Pharisees when he speaks of them as being that their fathers were the assassins of the prophets from Abel to Zacharias, which we know Abel was killed by Cain. And so he's associating them with Cain's bloodline and Cain's lineage. He speaks about them as being a brood of vipers as well. And so
which verse, do you remember the address of the verse that you're thinking of that talked about Cain being seraphic?
Yeah, it's just Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, which will go into the some of the other, as far as some of the ancient books of commentary, and then also I'll get to that as well. But we're gonna continue here.
Sorry to jump ahead, and I thought we may have missed it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And so I wanted to look at the punishments here from Genesis 3:15 through 3:17, because in my opinion, it's only by understanding the Eve eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the way that I am expressing it here that one can then make sense of the punishments that they are and that are revealed directly after they eat, and that are directed to the serpent to Eve and also to Adam. And so in Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity, this is to the serpent, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Well, we know that the second aspect of that was a prophecy of Yeshua as far as being the seed of the woman, and that when he was on the cross and crucified, that this prophecy was actually fulfilled in that I believe it was like 1600 years earlier when David had slaughtered Goliath, who without a doubt was serpent seed. He was a hybrid giant. He had taken his head back as trophy to prove to the people there in Jerusalem that he had killed the Philistine champion. And he then buried Goliath's skull in Golgotha, which means Goliath of Gath. And even the place of Calvary is alluding to a skull and means skull.
Mhm.
And so there where he buried Goliath's skull, Yeshua, when he was crucified on the cross, this prophecy was then fulfilled in that he was crushing the head of the serpent seed at the same time that it was nipping at his heel. And so, looking at the very next verse, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And so in this verse, and we'll look at the Hebrew words as well, um, that Eve, because she ate from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, she was pregnant. As I said, the serpent pounced upon her, and in beguiling her, that word in the Hebrew is nashah, and in the Greek expatio, and it means wholly seduced. And again, it's my opinion that the serpent impregnated her with Cain, and then Adam, repeating the act with Eve, then impregnated her with Abel. And so that's why we see the enmity between the seed lines being mentioned here, because the fulfillment of this prophecy would be that Cain would murder his half brother Abel. And then we see, again, the punishment for the woman is that she will bear children in sorrow, and that she will bring them forth in conception. And then afterwards, uh, having the lustful desire to procreate brought upon her as part of the natural aspect of being a human, that her desire should be to her husband instead of the serpent. And so,
Okay, so if I may jump in real quick,
yeah,
like
sure.
we were saying, there's a lot of you're making a lot of points, and I just want to be able to, instead of trying to stop at every single point you
Yeah,
make, I want to have to
yeah,
be
absolutely.
strategic in which ones I talk about. But you talked about the word being used for her being beguiled in Genesis 3:13, right? And you were talking about that one means wholly seduced.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, is that in the Greek? Is where you find it that translation? I'm looking through
The
some of the
Greek is in
concordances.
2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2.
Okay.
And that word is expatio. But no,
Do you,
in Genesis 3, the word is
Nasha?
nashah.
Yeah. So do you ascribe to any of the like the common concordances like Strong's or NASB, exhaustive, or Brown
Mm-hmm.
Driver's
Yeah,
Biggs? Okay.
these are from the Strong's. Yeah.
Because there's some other definitions I'm seeing that talk about being deceived, or to be morally seduced, or to be mentally deluded. And so I guess all I'm trying to say for those who are testing this idea, it seems to be there are a couple different ways that could be taken.
Well, yeah, but morally and as you say, would not lead to her bearing children. And so
Right.
the
And
only
that's
way that a woman can be sexually beguiled and corrupted and lose her chastity is if she is physically corrupted. And that is what leads to children. and offspring and progeny as these particular words. When you go into and you look at the words for seed and even, everything for bringing forth children, everything has to do with progeny.
Oh yes, yeah, I was just making sure in the context of Genesis 3 is that was the application of that word, because it doesn't speak until Genesis 4 about her actually bearing or bringing forth, through the help of the Lord. Genesis 4:1 that Adam went into her and she conceived.
Yeah, but in Genesis 3, after she eats fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the prophecy and the results of her eating this fruit is that she is now going to have to bear children in sorrow. And the serpent is told that the Cain, who is his progeny, his seed, is going to be at enmity with that of Adam's. And
I totally understand, and that's where I was. That would go off of basically the assumption that Adam and Eve were not instructed before this event that they would have children, right? Is that the premise that you're running with?
And
is
they
that
weren't.
When they were created, they weren't supposed to multiply, and they were only told to multiply after they fell and after they sinned?
Right. Yeah. No, you're talking about Genesis 1:26 through 28. And those were hominids that were created on the earth, and they were told to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. But this is not the creation of Adam in Genesis 2:4 through 2:7.
Okay, I apologize. So I didn't realize this. I apologize. Thank you for helping me understand where you're coming from. So you're talking about the pre-Adamic race theory as well, and that is actually some of the fundamental underpinnings of the conclusions you're drawing for the serpent seed theory as well. So you're saying that Genesis 1 is actually a totally different creation narrative. Genesis 2 is Adam and Eve, and then here we pick up the story in Genesis 3 that connects to Genesis 2.
Yeah, because in Genesis 1:26 through 28, they were created as couples and multiple races, and they were created specifically on the earth, and they were told to go forth and to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. But in Genesis 2:4, you see Adam is a special creation. He's put in the garden of God, which is in paradise, and he has Eve taken out from his side. Completely different creation story.
Okay, that's right. Because you said you believe that the Garden of Eden is as where it is today, according to 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 3. That's in the third layer of the firmament. And as a result,
the firmament.
Right, above the layer that's above us, up in the third heaven. And so you say it's always been there and it never was on the ground. And so therefore that's the premise you're going with, that Adam was put into that immediately above. And then when he was cast out in Genesis 3:24, how do you address that passage in Genesis 3:24 where it says he was taken out of the garden and taken to the land where he was created?
Well, his body was created from the dust, from the ground, but it was his spirit that was blown into it. And it does speak about that, like in different manuscripts, but he was taken and placed into paradise after he was created.
Sure. I agree with that. Do you factor in the Book of Jubilees into any of your studies?
Yeah, I do. I'll mention Jubilees here in a short bit, because in Jubilees, it also speaks about how Sheth, who, if you believe that Cain was their child, he should be the third son. But in the Book of Jubilees, it makes mention of Sheth, whose name is compensation, replacement, and substitution, because Abel was killed by his half-brother Cain. He is cited as being the second seed. And so we see that Adam and his children are Abel and Seth, and Cain is not included in his bloodline or genealogy, which is why in Luke chapter 3 you see that Cain is excluded from the genealogy of Christ as well, and that you have his whole bloodline, the first 10 generations, separated from the bloodline of Adam, which is listed in Genesis chapter 5, which we'll get to all of that here in a short bit as well.
Okay. All right. I'll let you continue. I was just trying to clarify, not just for me and make sure I knew where you're coming from, but also for people in the chat. Because like you said, some of the things that we try to do on my channel is make sure we we hear the correct story. And this is stuff where, if you see me, some of my videos I've done where I'm speaking to unbelievers or I'm being interviewed by atheists, I always tell them that, so much confusion happens when we're arguing over the wrong narratives or two different narratives. And our goal is like, let's just get clear on what's actually being said, and then we can just jump in and decipher. A lot of folks in the chat seem to be coming from various different places, and I'm just trying to help everyone catch up to where you are to make sure they understand what you're actually saying. I don't want them getting confused because they believe something they heard from somebody else,
Well, certainly. And I appreciate you doing that as well, because most people interject what they think I'm teaching. And, a lot of what they say is actually incorrect. Like the whole thing with Adam having sex with the serpent. That's not what I teach at all.
Right.
And so, and it's very clear that when we get to the Targum, Genesis chapter 4:2, it says, and she added to bear from her husband, Abel. And so we see that the result of him eating the fruit with Eve was that Abel was born as a fraternal twin. And so we'll get to that here in a short bit. But again, looking at the word for seed here, it's the Hebrew word zerah, and it means fruit, plant, sowing time, posterity, carnally, children, offspring, descendants, semen, virility, fruitfulness. And so you see all of these, the same thing. The seed is children and a reference to children. And when we get to the actual Targum passage of that particular verse in Genesis 3:15, not only does it say that God's going to put enmity between thy seed and her seed, but it says thy son and her sons. And the reason it says thy son and her sons is because Cain kills Abel, and then Seth is the replacement for Abel, and it is through Seth that the children of Adam will be propagated in the 10 generations after. And we also see, real quick, one last thing, is that Seth is cited as being in the similitude and likeness of Adam, where Cain is not.
Okay. So you referenced the Targum, but you had definitions on the word on the screen there. So I wasn't able to read along from what you were referencing, but you were talking about the seed and from the Zerah definition you gave, and you mentioned the Targum. Were you repeating the Targum from Genesis 3:17 through 24?
Well, I'll just bring it up so you can
Okay.
see it.
Because I've read the Targum, and I didn't remember it saying the sons. I remember it says from your seed and her seed, and I just want to make sure that I'm following.
Yeah, let me go to it. And here it is. Okay. This, I believe this is the Targum here. The third one. And so down here it says, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between the seed of thy son and the seed of her sons. Do you see that?
I do. And it goes on to expound, doesn't it, though? And when
it does.
When the sons of the woman keep the commandments of the law, they'll be prepared to smite you upon your head.
Right.
I always thought this was an interesting translation because it actually mentions the law back in Genesis 3 as part of the prophecy, at least according to the Targum translation.
Right. And not only that, but if you look at the further elaboration after that, it tells us that it was in paradise that they had fallen from, and that it was after they were cast out of the heavens that the cherubim are put into place to keep them from eating from the tree of the the tree of life, because otherwise they would have been in a forever fallen state. So,
and that's under the assumption that they were in the third layer during this while it's transpiring. Would the how you view this storyline, would that change at all if the Garden of Eden was actually on the ground and that could be shown from other books?
Well, it's not, and I have verification of that from many stories, even here in the Targum, as well as both Vision of Paul and Second Corinthians, and also the Book of Enoch. They describe paradise as being above the vaulted dome of the earth. And so the Garden of Eden, where they were cast down to, yeah, it's on the earth, but that's not where they fell from. And so, here, well, you can read it in the story of the Targum as well, where it talks about it, but that's after chapter 3, verse 20. So we'll get to that in a short bit. All right, let me just skip ahead, I guess, to that portion of the story. And from the King James, it says, "Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken." And then you see, "So he drave out the man and placed him at the east of the Garden of Eden, cherubims, flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life." So this, in my opinion, is when they were cast out of paradise. And reading the Targum version, you get a great elaboration on this. And so I'll just read a little bit for people that are not familiar. And Adam called the name of his wife Hava. Hava means life giver, because she is the mother of all the children of men, meaning that she was the mother of the serpent seed as well as the seed of the woman. That's not the same for Adam, because he was not the father of Cain. And so continuing, and the Lord God made to Adam and to his wife vestures of honor from the skin of the serpent which he had cast from him upon the skin of their flesh, instead of that adornment which had been cast away, and he clothed them. And again, this opinion, in my opinion, is that they were in mortal form. And continuing, "And the Lord God said to the angels who ministered before him, Behold, Adam is sole on the earth, as I am sole in the heavens above. And it will be that they will arise from him who will know to discern between good and evil. Had he kept the commandments which I appointed to him, he would have lived and subsisted as the tree of life forever. But now, because he hath not kept that which I prescribed, it is decreed against him, that we keep him from the Garden of Eden before he reached forth his hand and take of the tree of life." We know that in Revelation 2, it also says that the tree of life is in the garden of God. And the Garden of Eden mentioned here is paradise, not the Garden of Eden that they were cast down to, which we'll see as we continue. Behold, if he eat thereof living, he will live and subsist forever. And the Lord God removed him from the Garden of Eden, and he went and dwelt on Mount Moriah to cultivate the ground from which he had been created, and he drave out the man from thence where he had made to dwell the glory of his Shekinah at the first between the two cherubi, which are the cherubim, before he had created the world. It also talks in about a lot of places that paradise was created before the foundations of this world. Hold on one second. I'm going to take a sip of water.
Okay. We have some great questions in the chat, guys. Please try to remain. If it's a question that you want us to ask, we're running up upon the 48-minute mark here, and if there's a question that you want us to ask here in a few minutes as we get through the basic chapters that he's trying to introduce here, please hold on to your question, put it in all caps, make it sure it's a coherent sentence. That way we can see it and read it easily, and that way you have a better chance of getting it relayed. But someone right now, as a real quick question for me, this is played off of something that I'm seeing going on in the chat, Zen. People are asking if there are commandments in the law of God. So we actually talk about the law of God emphatically on this channel, and we go over the history of it and all the texts, and how we teach that it was eternal, that it was the same law of God that's kept in heaven by the Father, His Son, and His angels, Amen. Same as He gave to mankind on the earth. And so I guess the question that would arise from something like that is, according to your interpretation of this idea, if paradise, the garden, was in the third layer of the firmament, and Adam and Eve are up there and they're given commandments, would you think that they're keeping the law of God while they're there? And if so, would that result in a really, really different type of penalty if Eve had committed some sort of cross-species sexual act?
They were told to keep the law, but the one commandment they were given and was to not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the reason they were told not to eat is not because they God did not want them to lose their immortal aspect. And so that was why he told them that in the day you eat thereof you shall die. And that's exactly what happened to them. When they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they took on mortal form, and that's when the serpent beguiled Eve and impregnated her with Cain. And so it was more about keeping them in mortal aspect and not falling into uh, immortal into mortal form,
Okay,
into flesh and body.
because you're coming from the general predisposition that they were created immortal to begin with, and only
That's right.
after they sinned they received mortal flesh.
That's
So
right.
I guess the only place, and I don't want to stop you from continuing too much further what you're saying. The only thing that I would struggle with that is the narrative of Genesis 2 that he's created from the dust of the earth. And so you're saying that someone that's created from the dust of the earth could be immortal if they wanted to be.
Well, yeah, initially before his body was, see, Adam, the second Adam was created different. Even though his body was created of the dust, he was not yet blood. He was flesh and bone, but he did not have blood within that flesh and bone body.
And
Because,
that's what you, because, all right, I just want to make sure I understand. So then the first hominids that you said that you believe chapter 1 is different.
yeah, those are different. Those were created on the earth and they were created as couples.
And do you think they had flesh or blood? Because honestly, I'm having to get your
Yeah,
interpretation
I
of this because
believe
I'm
they
not
were
seeing these
flesh.
sentences.
They were flesh, body, and blood.
Okay. Okay. So then in your interpretation, Adam is in Genesis 2 he's still created with out of the soil, and the breath of life is still breathed into him. Genesis 2:7, but he is different in the fact that he's not truly someone that has blood running through his veins, but he's able to live above the firmament. And
Yes,
this
he
is
was
what
placed in
would
the
I would
paradise.
struggle with this is Enoch 15, where the Father says that for those who create in heaven above, their abode is in heaven. Those who create on the earth below, their abode isn't on the earth, and that's why they can't transition between. And the rebellious watchers were punished for coming down to copulate, create wives and families on the earth down below, because it wasn't intended for them. It wasn't their place. So I guess what I'm saying, what your theory interprets as Adam is made of the dust of the earth, but then he's given an abode in heaven that he would have lived forever if he'd followed the one commandment. But what I was trying to ask is that the only commandment? Or was he not told that he can't murder and he can't cheat and he can't lie and he can't do any, like, the only commandment was they just don't eat the tree, and then they were given no other instruction while they're in the garden?
That's what we're told. Yeah.
Okay.
You see somewhere else where it
Yeah,
says that.
in Jubilees chapter 3, I think it's verse 14. It talks about how the angel, or the narration of Jubilees, is the angel speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, and he's telling how they were commissioned to teach Adam and Eve how to tend and care and take after the garden. And then we see Adam later down, before leaving the garden and being expelled from it, that he's actually offering incense on the tabernacle inside the garden. And that's where, to me, that just seems like there'd be a lot more instruction for him to have that kind of competency in actually performing a form of worship to the Father.
Well,
So
I think when we get back up into paradise, we're all going to be worshiping the Father, and that's, without question, all the angels. That's what they were created to do. And I do, without a doubt, know that the law was established in the heaven, and I'm sure that the angels were teaching. But again, with regard to the commandments that we follow here on the earth, they were in immortal aspect. They weren't even supposed to have children. There was no murder. There's no, just like it says, with the angels, they are not given in marriage in heaven because they don't procreate. So the whole thing of a human nature and honoring father and mother and all that has to do with humanity and our being in a fallen state of being now, in a fallen form. All that wouldn't apply to us in heaven.
here's the $1 million question. as you and I are both firmamentalists, and that's a joking term I use with folks, right? Because I love the firmament and I love all the scriptures that describe it. And you've written an entire book on the firmament where you've collected all the passages, and it's it's great. So if we're all descendants of Adam and Eve at this point, would we be able to, in our fleshly body, would we be able to abide and live, literally, breathe the air and exist for more than 2 seconds in the paradise in the third heaven right now? If we were to
No,
get
you can't go to paradise in immortal form. You
okay,
have to be in immortal embodiment in the spirit. When to be absent from the flesh is to be present with God. And like the vision of Paul shows us, that after a person dies, those that are righteous go on to paradise. And even when Christ died on the cross and he restored Adam, and even to the thief, he told him that this day you will be with me in paradise. The thief went to paradise and waited for Adam and Christ to ascend with all of these righteous seed. And they were given over to the archangel Michael. They were baptized in the Archursian lake, and then restored to their former bright nature. They were allowed to enter into their first estate, which again is paradise. We see this story is in the Gospel of Nicodemus and also the Gospel of Bartholomew, which shows to us again that originally they were in a bright natured form and they were living in paradise where they were restored to. And so, and that's part of what I was reading here, which I didn't get to finish, but from the Targum, it tells us that, they had this immortal, bright natured aspect when they were cast down. And we can tell that it was, the tree of life is in paradise in the garden of God. Revelation tells us that. And I
Enoch.
can share some other passages from, Enoch and also the vision of Paul, which also confirm this, that paradise where they had fallen from is above the vaulted dome. That's where New Jerusalem is. That is the paradise of God. That's where the righteous ones live even now. And when Adam and his descendants, and even the thief on the cross, when they were taken to paradise, Enoch and Elijah were already living there, because they had not succumbed to death. And we know that they're going to be the two witnesses of Revelation 11. And at that time, they will be killed for the first time and left in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days as part of that end time prophecy.
So do you hold to the idea then that the concept of sheol is no longer a thing after the resurrection of Christ?
No, it is for the wicked.
But
The wicked still go to Sheol.
okay, so in your idea, you hold to the traditional concept of, at the resurrection of Christ, he took with him everyone who had died from Adam up to that point to heaven.
Right.
And and you're saying they met the thief that was on the cross because he kind of preceded Yeshua's resurrection by 3 days. And so
No, he went to paradise. He was given a pass to not have to go to Sheol and went directly to paradise. And Christ said, "This day you will be with me in paradise." So when he died, the thief just went straight to paradise, and Christ had to descend down into Sheol to break open the doors of iron, the gates of brass, and to take Adam and his descendants out of Sheol. And then he took them back up into paradise above the vaulted dome of the earth. They were baptized in the Archursian lake and then allowed to enter into the city of God,
okay.
New Jerusalem. But before they did, they met the thief, and the thief told them about how he believed on Christ as the Son of God, and that's why he was there. And then they entered together into paradise, and they met Enoch and Elijah.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you for clarifying your stance on that. And there's a lot of people asking in the chat because they, to have the discussion tonight. As you know, when I first reached out to you, I thought the best way that we might be able to have this discussion, so that there's no confusion amongst anyone listening or watching, would be a formal debate with times and everything. But then, as we talked further about it, we went with what we're doing tonight, which is more of just having a discussion about these things. So I just want everyone in the chat to know this isn't intended to be an actual debate. This is just Zen already knows that I don't hold this theory in my teachings on my channel, and I know that he does. And we both knew coming into this presentation that we are on opposite sides of this theory, and that's fine. We're both okay with that. We both still love each other as brothers in the Lord. So everyone in the chat, it's okay. We're just having a conversation, and that's why I'm asking him to clarify, because I've heard various strains of serpent seed theory. Now, this isn't just me turning on the camera and saying, okay, explain everything. He knew that I'm going to be asking him questions as we go.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, guys. So this is we're trying to walk a fine line of, him letting him present what he teaches about this topic, and then me trying to learn what he teaches about this topic while you guys watch. So it's truly, I've never done anything like this on my channel, and hopefully it's coming across the right way. But I'm having to clarify for people in the chat. So okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. We'll get back to it.
No,
Tim.
it's
I'll let
good.
you keep going.
And yeah, I want you to interrupt anytime you have a question or if you have a point to make. So feel free to interject at any point. But I just want to finish reading this passage from the Targum, which again shows that there's a distinction between, even though the Garden of Eden here is paradise, they were cast down from paradise to what is the Garden of Eden on earth. And so then it continues. He dwelt out. Well, let me go up one sentence. And the Lord God removed him from the Garden of Eden, and he went and dwelt on Mount Moriah to cultivate the ground from which he had been created. And he drave out the man from thence where he had made to dwell the glory of his Shekinah and the first between the two cherubim, or cherubia. Before he had created the world, he created the law. He prepared the Garden of Eden for the righteous, that they might eat and delight themselves with the fruit of the tree, because they would have practiced in their lives the doctrine of the law in this world and have maintained the commandments. But he prepared Gehenna for the wicked, which is like the sharp consuming sword of two edges. In the midst of it, he hath prepared flakes of fire and burning coals for the judgment of the wicked, who rebelled in their life against the doctrine of the law. To serve the law is better than to eat of the fruit of the tree of life, the law which the word of the Lord prepared, which we know that's Christ, that man in keeping it might continue and walk in the paths of the way of the life in the world to come. And there's a whole nother version of this from the Jerusalem Targum, but I'm not going to go into that. But I wanted to bring up one other thing really quickly, because you had asked about the law. And here in the Legends of the Jews, it talks about, in the beginning, 2,000 years before the heaven and the earth, 7 things were created. The Torah written with black fire on white fire and lying in the lap of God. The divine throne erected in heaven, which later was over the heads of the Hayot, which are the cherubim in Ezekiel chapter 1. Paradise on the right side of God, hell on the left side. The celestial sanctuary directly in front of God, having a jewel on its altar graven with the name of the Messiah, and a voice that cries loud, "Return, ye children of men." And so, you know,
Is
I'll
that,
just
do you think that word hell being used in that first paragraph, is that referring to Gehenna or Sheol?
Sheol.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but Gehenna, Sheol, Tartarus, they're all really kind of labels for the same thing, because
I thought,
there's 2 places, one for the righteous, which is paradise, New Jerusalem, and then the place of Sheol, which is in the interior of the earth. Go ahead with what you're saying.
I was just saying, I thought that Gehenna was specifically for the lake of fire. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't that what we are seeing in First Enoch chapter 27 or 28, and also I believe in chapter 43, that they're seeing the lake of fire, the place of final condemnation, and that is actually near the throne of God, near the 7 mountains above the firmament. But the Sheol concept, as Enoch 22 explains, was a separate lower compartment underneath the plane of the earth.
I don't really know where the lake of fire is located, whether that's above the vaulted dome or not. But that's a elaborate,
Interesting.
interesting point, and something that I should take a look at even greater. But wanted to bring up the one final paragraph here. When God resolved upon the creation of the world, he took counsel with the Torah. Her advice was this: O Lord, a king without an army and without countries, courtiers, and attendants hardly deserves the name of king, for none is nigh to express the homage due to him. The answer pleased God exceedingly. Thus did he teach all earthly kings by his divine example to undertake naught without first consulting advisors. And so it's then that the Torah tells them, that man is going to fall away, but that Christ as Messiah would enter in order to rectify the fall. And so redemption, the theme of redemption and the fall of humanity, all of that was known even before the foundations of the world, but that paradise was already created, already established, as was Sheol. And so then we know that the earth was created as what would be a union for those two particular places, and that it is on the earth that duality, the experience of good and evil, light and darkness, pain and pleasure, all of that comes into being.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think that's what in Julie's chapter 2, we talk about the abyss. I think it's verse 2. He talks about all the things that were being made on day 1. And obviously, we know from Genesis 1:1 as well, the heavens above were made, but also the abysses were created as well. So I've always, my buddy and I, Ken Heidebrecht, we theorized that is Sheol being spoken of, created on day 1. With the other layers of the firmament before our layer was fashioned and filled out and made. But I know that might run contrary to your theory of the pre-Adamic race, but that's the conclusion he and I have come to over study.
Well, with the pre-Adamic race, it's my opinion that in Genesis 1:2, that the war in heaven had led to the destruction of the first world age, and so everything was annihilation and had to be reconstructed and recreated and reformed. And that's what we see in Genesis 1:11 and onwards, is that the second world age and the earth is being recreated, the creatures refashioned to inhabit the land and the oceans and the seas. And that's why the hominids made in Genesis 1:26 through 28, they're told to go forth and to replenish the earth because it had been destroyed previously.
Okay. All right.
All right, so we're now to Genesis 4:1, and we'll just cover, 2 Genesis 5, and I'm not going to cover every aspect of Genesis 4, just mainly this first verse here. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Well, everybody says that this is, the trump card for the serpent seed theory, but in actuality, when you understand the fullness of what is being presented here, this in fact just verifies that the knowledge of serpent seed is encoded. And I'll explain why as we look at some of the other, the Targum rendition, as well as some of the commentaries which are specific to Genesis 4:1. And in the Targum it says, and Adam knew Hava, which again, Hava is the Hebrew for Eve, and it means life giver. Hava, his wife, who had desired the angel, semicolon, and she conceived and bare Cain. And she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. And she added to bear from her husband Adam, his twin, even Abel. And so, as I said, looking at the Genesis 3:15, where God is putting enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, that plays out with the birth of Cain and Abel, because Cain is of the wicked one, as it says in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12. And it was her desiring the angel, being beguiled by Satan, the serpent, in 2 Corinthians 11:2, that led to her conceiving and bearing Cain, because again, he was of the wicked one. And then where it says, and she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. Well, this passage doesn't seem to make sense in the King James unless you understand that truly it was her desiring the angel that led to her acquiring this man. And it's not just the angel of the Lord, which, people would think that this is a representative of Cain, but it actually says in these other translations, which we're about to go into, that she has acquired a man from the angel of the Lord. And so we'll look at a couple of
Zen,
those
which Targum are you reading from on the screen here?
right here. This is the only one.
I mean, which is that the Jerusalem Targum or
It's the Aramaic Targum.
the Aramaic Targum? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the Aramaic, the oldest and most authoritative, and the one that dates back to the 4th century BC. All right, and so we'll look at the traditions of the Jews and the legends of the Jews on this particular verse. Their interpretation of Genesis 4:1 from Johann Eiseminger, which dates back to the 1700s. The traditions of the Jews, that says, and Adam knew his wife, who had conceived by the angel Samael, was pregnant, and bare Cain, whose resemblance was like the upper creatures, and not like the lower. And she said, I have got the man, the angel of the Lord. The next translation is from the Legends of the Jews, Louis Ginsburg, published in 1909. He says, Cain's descent from Satan, who is the angel Samael, was revealed in his seraphic appearance. At his birth, the exclamation was wrung from Eve, I have gotten a man through an angel of the Lord. And so, looking at all of these verses, and then even in the Targum in Genesis 3:6, where it speaks about the serpent because of his subtlety that he deceived Eve. The name of the serpent there is actually Samael, the angel of death. And so it names the serpent as Samael. And it is actually in these two other translations that Samael is said to be the father of Cain as well. He is the angel of death, the viper of God.
And that's it. And which translations?
In the traditions of the Jews,
Okay.
you should see it on the screen.
I do see it. I thought you were referring, when you say the word
And
translation, I think you're talking about an actual text.
Interpretation. No, these.
Okay.
Well, these are actual what they, as far as they interpret the Genesis 4:1. When you look at these particular passages, it is Genesis 4:1 that they're speaking about.
I understand that. Yeah.
But they're not different language translations. No.
Okay. I'm just trying to, again, as always, just make sure the audience knows the words that we're using. And I just, because most people, when they hear the word interpretation or the word translation, they think two different things. And they think a translation is like an authoritative version of the scriptures as opposed to an interpretive writing and commentary. So that's where I just want to make sure people understand. That's all.
And actually the Targum is a translation, which, as I said, the word Targum in Aramaic just means translation, and it was the Aramaic translation of the original Hebrew Torah. And so, again, in my opinion, looking at and understanding this verse and what's being revealed, even in the King James, you find that it is encoded that, this passage that is left out of the King James, who had desired the angel, it was her desiring the angel because she was tempted by Satan, beguiled by Satan, that led to the conception and the bearing of Cain. And that's, again, why he was of the wicked one. And then it would make sense that she would say, I have acquired a man from or through the angel of the Lord, which is exactly what Samael was. He was an angel of the Lord. I'm going to go to one other point here, and that is Genesis chapter 5, and then we can take questions if you like from anybody in the chat room. In Genesis 5, in the Targum, it elaborates a little bit more on this particular, the differentiation between Cain and Abel and their bloodlines. And again, as I said, Cain has a seraphic appearance, which means that he was serpentine, snake-like, that he represented and looked like the upper creatures, which it's referencing the seraphim angels there, which the word Sarah is snake. And so the seraphim angels are also dragon-like angels. And so looking at Genesis chapter 5 in the Targum, it says this: and Adam lived 130 years and begat Sheth, which again, Sheth means compensation, substitution, and replacement, who had the likeness of his image and of his similitude. For before had Hava, life giver, born Cain. Cain means acquired or possession, who was not like to him. And Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealized in the book of the genealogy of Adam. But afterwards there was one born like him, and he called his name Sheth. Now, I mentioned that Cain means acquired and a possession. And that's exactly what Cain was. He was acquired by Adam as his stepson. He became a possession. He was not his of his bloodline, which is why Adam, when he's born, uh, he even makes mention of this. There are passages which describe, which I'll read just a couple verses, and then we can move on from this point.
I'll have some questions after you're finished reading this
Yeah,
part.
sure.
Okay.
Just a couple more. I had told you the book of Jubilees, it says, and Adam and his wife mourned for Abel 4 weeks of years. And in the 4th year of the 5th week, they became joyful. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Seth. For he said, God hath raised up a second seed unto us on the earth instead of Abel, for Cain slew him. So if Cain was the firstborn son of Adam, Seth should be the third son of Adam, not the second. But because Cain is not Adam's child, we see that it speaks of him as Seth as being the second seed, which indeed is what he was. Because if you look at Luke chapter 3 again, you see that Cain is excluded from the genealogy of Christ because his bloodline is separated from that of Adam's. It's found in Genesis chapter 4, and Adam's bloodline begins with Seth because Abel was murdered in Genesis chapter 5. And we can see again the differentiation in these bloodlines. In the Keber Nagas, it says that, and he drove him out of the garden because of his apostasy through the sin of the serpent and the plotting of the devil. And at that sorrowful moment, Cain was born. And when Adam saw that the face of Cain was ill-tempered or sullen, and his appearance evil, he was sad. And then Abel was born. And when Adam saw that his appearance was good and his face good-tempered, he said, this is my son, the heir of my kingdom. But again, because he was murdered in Genesis 5:3, we see that in the King James, Adam lived 130 years, begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and called his name Seth.
Now, you mind if I jump in with some questions?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So you're talking about you've already scrolled past it now. I apologize.
Oh, I can go up.
Some of the things you were mentioning, the points above, where you're dissecting the idea of Jubilees 4:1, also 4:7, how can't this Jubilees 4, excuse me, I meant to say Genesis 4:1 and Jubilees 4:7, and the idea that Seth is mentioned as the second seed of Adam, because in your interpretation of what that means, you're thinking that's to say Cain wasn't originally his, Abel was his, and therefore that's why Seth is being called the second. Yet, how do you feel towards the idea of the word seed itself being used, as we saw from the Targum, meaning someone that keeps the commandments of God, as it expounded on the children of the woman, being, as we see Jubilees use that same terminology about being the seed of Abraham, is this the prophesied seed of the one to come in chapter 23, as is also repeated in Galatians 4 and other places in the New Testament, speaking specifically of this metaphoric, not literal zera, but this metaphoric zera of seed, one that was destined to be resulting in the Messiah, right? Like we also see mentioned in Genesis 17, through Abraham's seed, out of him will come great nations. Do you think that has any bearing on how those passages could be looked at, and to see that it's not physically speaking of a literal zera being the actual genetic seed, but instead Abel was the one that was doing the commandments, as we see in Genesis 4:7. He was actually bringing forth and rightly dividing his first fruits that he was bringing forth, and Cain was not. And so therefore he's not obeying the commandments of God. Instead, he has the seed of the serpent, right? The disposition of the unfaithful commandment breaker, as opposed
Well,
to
yeah,
commandment.
that's the way a lot of people try to explain it away. But again, looking at Matthew chapter 13, it's very clear that Christ there explains the two seed lines. And he says that the enemy snuck into the garden and sowed the tares. And he says that the enemy is the devil, and the devil is the father of the tares. And this is after he sends the multitudes away, and he explains, because they ask him, oh, tell us, explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. We know it not. And that's when Christ goes into and tells them specifically that the tares are the children of the devil. And so it very much is a literal physical bloodline. And that what occurred in the garden was a actual physical corruption of Eve. Because otherwise, why and how would it result in her losing her chastity? And then
Well,
also,
that isn't that kind of an assumption though of the
no,
passage in
it's not,
Genesis 3?
because again, when you look at Genesis 3:15, it tells us right there that because they ate and they were deceived in eating the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that the serpent has seed. He has a bloodline
Right. Well,
in
that's
this world.
exactly, but that would be using the predeceived or preconceived idea of what that word seed is referring to as a physical, and then using the preconceived idea that because the statement is being repeated in Genesis 3:15 about the pain and childbirth that Eve would receive as a result of her sin, which wasn't the only thing that she was spoken to about. She was also spoken to about, having desire for her husband.
Yeah,
But
but that
but
also
you're
comes from them now being in physical embodiment and her having
that
the lustful desire to procreate.
okay. So from just to let you know, from my perspective, what I'm seeing from some of this is the coming to this Genesis 3:15 text of the prophecy that's given to Eve, and you're immediately equating that is spoken to her because she's pregnant, where as opposed to that spoken to her because it was always intended that her and Adam and Eve were to procreate, and you do that because you separate the Adam and Eve that you're reading of in Genesis 2 and 3 from the male and female created in Genesis 1:26 and 27.
Yeah, well, they're two
Okay.
different creation
Well, I
accounts.
mean that is up for debate though, right? Is it up for debate at all?
Well, yeah, it can, and it is debated, but in my opinion, it's very clear that when you read Genesis 1:26 through 28, that these hominids were created as couples. They were created on the earth, and they were told to be fruitful, to multiply, and to replenish the earth. Because again, in my opinion, in Genesis 1:2, you have the earth being destroyed and it became without form and void, which the Hebrew there is tohu wabohu, which means a deserted wasteland. It became haya tohu wabohu. It became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. We're told in Isaiah chapter 45:18 and at Second Ezra that it was created to be a perfect work and that it was created to be inhabited, but because it was destroyed, and this is clear in Second Peter chapter 3, that the first world age was destroyed by water. It is perished. It was completely annihilated. And then we see that it's recreated again. And these hominids, as well as all the creatures mentioned in the story leading up to what is the Genesis chapter 2, 4 through 7 creation of Adam, and this Adam was placed into paradise. It's a different creation account completely.
Okay, so basically, what I'm gathering from this, and this is what I have heard, I just want to make sure, because my biggest thing is like we just don't want to slander anybody. Our ministry is slandered all the time by people that hear little snippets of what we talk about, and then they run and start saying we're teaching crazy stuff. And so, I don't want you to be slandered, and I want to make sure you have a chance to state fully the foundations of where you're laying your case, because I've heard you talk about this not just in your personal videos, but also your joint broadcasts with other presenters. And so basically, what I'm hearing is that there is a significant part of the foundation of your serpent seed theory that is based upon the pre-Adamic race theory. Is that accurate to say?
No,
So
the pre-Adamic race is something completely separate.
well, that's why
Adam
I was asking Genesis 3. It seems that where you're getting some of you're coming to the text with some preconceived ideas about what you think Genesis 3:15 is implying or saying, and what you think the Adam and Eve of Genesis 2 is different from Genesis 1. That is based upon the pre-Adamic race theory, right?
Well, it is different, and anybody that reads and studies, it's pretty clear.
Okay.
Even my friend Gary Wayne, and when I was doing shows with David Carrico, we talked about this in great detail. But with regard to the actual physical bloodline of Cain, if you look at the screen that I have up, I have 3 different genealogies. One, the book of the bee, the other, the cave of the treasures, and the other is Luke chapter 3. And you see that in all 3 of these genealogies, which out of the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the truth be established, you see that it says from the Son of God, the son of Adam, the son of Seth, the son of Enos, on and on. Cain is excluded from all 3 of these genealogies. And again, it's because Cain was of the wicked one. And when you look up that word of in that particular passage in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, of means offspring or son of. And so, and even the other, you can look at different translations, which we can go to that next. But there's many that speak of Cain being of the evil one, a son of, a descendant, a progeny, a child of. And, this is something that was common knowledge back in the ancient times. And it's only been since the translations of, the Aramaic into Greek and then into Latin and into English that this knowledge has been lost. But it is still encoded within the scriptures. And again, clarity can be found from the words of Christ himself in Matthew 13. He tells us that the enemy sowed the tares. The tares are the children of the devil, and the devil is the father of the tares. I mean, it's clear, and it's speaking about a physical progeny, because even in the Greek there, the word for seed and the word for, children and all that is the same thing.
Is there a Greek word for the metaphoric use of being the son of somebody because you abide in that behavior, and you've learned after them, kind of like when Yeshua said, "Call no man father," because usually the father was someone they in a Hebrew idiomatic sense they looked up to someone teaching them or someone that ruled over them and referred to them as a father. But they weren't physically a father.
Yeah, but again, in this case, when you examine it and with open mind and look at all the evidence of it, in my opinion, it's very clear that this is speaking about a physical lineage. And, again, undoubtedly, it was the beguilement of Eve by the serpent, which led to her bearing Cain, and that he was of the wicked one, which is why he's completely different in disposition from Adam and Eve. In their innocence, they were not murderers, liars, and deceivers. But we know that Satan is referenced as such. And so for Cain to be of the wicked one, it would make sense that he would be a murderer when his parents were not, and that it's the inclinations of the devil within him that lead him to murder his half-brother Abel.
So in that genealogy, the 3 comparisons of the genealogy you were showing above, now, have you ever toyed with the idea that those genealogies and the reason why they would skip Cain and Abel and just go right to Seth is because it's following the priesthood that's given to us in Genesis?
No, I think you're reaching, because again,
Mhm.
Cain is not the child of Adam, and that's clear why he's left out of the genealogy of Christ in all three of these.
Well, I mean, so is Abel. Abel's left out of the
But Abel
genealogy as
was
well.
murdered. He didn't bear any
Right.
children.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, though, and that would
Cain
also.
bore children. And if he was the first son of Adam, wouldn't he hold a prominent position here in these genealogies? Shouldn't he be listed first?
No, this is why you read Jubilees 4:7, which is the seed that's raised up in place of Abel, and this is why Genesis 4:1 you'd have Eve saying, I've begotten a man, another man from the Lord, because Abel had been slain. Cain killed him, so he's now exiled and out of the picture because he's not following the ways of the Father, and he cannot be a part of the priesthood to be passed down from Adam. So the guy that was showing himself approved to be the priesthood, which is also the ruler and the leadership to be passed down from Adam, was the one that got killed. And the one that got killed, he can't step into that place either because he obviously doesn't have the disposition and the behavior of the commandments. This is my interpretation of these passages. And
Yeah, I
so
realize that.
and so therefore you have a genealogy or a lineage, if you will, that you're putting on screen here that would be following the actual priesthood, which is what we see the eternal Torah being kept by those early patriarchs before the flood, which is why Noah is actually would be called a righteous man who also did the ways of the Father and knew how to do sacrifices and knew what clean and unclean was and would know how to actually be a father, a holy judge, as Jubilees chapter 10 calls it, over the other people, because he knows the ways of the Father, and those were passed down from Adam down to Enoch, down to Noah. And we see that lineage broken down for us in the book of Enoch. So that's my interpretation of in a broad sense of some of the stuff you've been digging into in great detail. But I do want to say, brother, there's a lot that you clearly you've had to defend this teaching from so many angles. I can tell that, because you have so many angles that you're addressing, and I know people give you a hard time for it. So that's why I'm letting you explain your side of it and go through the different angles that you want to present tonight. And like I said, that we had already talked about doing a part 2, because I think there is a lot to go through and there's a lot of angles that you have to cover. So again, I want to thank you for coming on and being willing to cover them with me, because even though I'm not convinced yet, but I know you have a lot more you want to go through. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, of course. Because again, there's so much, and I personally think you're tap dancing around and ignoring a lot of the information. But that's okay, because a lot of
I think
people
I think where we would
did.
disagree fundamentally is some of the information you're providing is from books that I would never consider authoritative, but that's where we would personally disagree on which apocryphal text or pseudepigraphal text that would be considered authoritative, and that's okay. Again, that doesn't disparage anything, but I think from what I'm seeing, from the initial um, highly accredited, highly well used books of all the different canons, as well as their textual criticism, their textual validation from history and from what's been found and validated, as well as the tried and true books that we're already familiar with. I've yet to see a strong case. I do know that you are putting forth a lot of word study into this, and that's important as well. So I know that we've got some questions in the chat. Do you want to take a couple of those before we
Yeah, we
continue?
can. I want to cover one other thing before
Okay.
we do this, because you're saying that I'm taking this from other sources, but again, let's look at just two other things really quickly,
Sure.
and that has to do with Matthew, chapter 13, which I'll go into something else really quickly first,
Sure.
and because this, again, it's undeniable, and when you look at it, this is from Matthew 23, and there's also the same thing in Luke. It says, um, even so, ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because ye build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. Ye serpents, ye generations of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias the son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. And so here Christ is associating the murderers of the prophets, the Pharisees that are conspiring even his murder, with the assassins of the prophets. And what bloodline? He says that they are, a generation of vipers. It was Cain that murdered Abel, and Herod, who murdered Zacharias, the son of Barachias, who was the father of John the Baptist, the high priest. And so, again, in my opinion, it is clear that the Pharisees are also of this bloodline, and that they were the murderers of the prophets from Abel to Zacharias. And because we know Cain murdered Abel, he's without a doubt connecting them to his bloodline. And Cain is the seed of the serpent, the child of the wicked one. His genealogy excluded, not because he's some metaphorical, a person that doesn't do good, but because he is actual physical bloodline lineage of the serpent. And
Okay,
that
so that brings in a really good question then, which is if that is the case and all the Pharisees were literal bloodline of the serpent, then well, there's two big questions that would come from that. The first one would be, what would you feel about the Apostle Paul, because he was a Pharisee,
he
yet
was a Benjamite, he wasn't a
so there's
bloodline of the serpent.
there's a caveat that the Benjaminites weren't didn't the Pharisees? So you're saying that the Pharisees of Yeshua's day, even those like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, they
No, not all of them, but these particular ones that he's alluding to that say that they are of Abraham's seed, but are not. That is actually specific to Joshua chapter 10, because you see that in the time of Joshua, there was a certain tribe that acted as if they were from a faraway place, and they had Joshua and the princes of Israel spare them and to make covenant with them,
the city
and
of
they
Ai.
were. What's that?
You're not talking about the city of Ai, are you?
No, I'm talking about when they were
Joshua 10.
warring. Yeah, Joshua 10, when they were warring against, they were going into Jericho. And
Hmm.
uh, but anyways, this particular tribe, they acted like they were from a faraway place, but they were of this bloodline of Cain, and they were spared, and they were, instead of being killed because they had made covenant with them without asking God about it, they made them servants unto the scribes and the Levites, and they actually became the ones that usurped the Levitical priesthood by the time of Christ. And so
Okay.
that's why they were the Pharisees that were conspiring his murder, and that there was an actual bloodline connected to them, which did become and take over the Levitical priesthood. And they were the ones that were conspiring his murder, and that Christ was saying of them that, I know you are Abraham's seed, but really you are of your father, the devil. And he was talking about that as well. And they talk about how they were never, that they were never taken over, and that's because they were spared by Joshua.
So
And
then you're
that's a
saying
whole nother story as well. But
in John 8, when he's speaking to the Pharisees and he's saying you claim that you're of the seed of Abraham, but really your father's the devil,
right,
that
that's
he
literal as well.
okay. Um, let me see. Let me go try to find that passage real quick. I hope I'm not misquoting it, because I think he says you either claim or you say you are. This John 8:42, I believe. Jesus said unto them, Jesus said to the Jews, Samaritan, seek glory. Abraham's dead. Oh, he says, verse 83 says, are you greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? No, that's not it. I apologize. Verse 39. They said and answered unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said unto them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man that has told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. This Abraham did not do, basically. Ye do the deeds of your father. They said to him, we are not born of fornication. We have one father, even God. And Jesus said unto them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. So in verse 39, when they make the claim, Abraham is our father, and Jesus responds back to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. You're saying, so they can't be speaking, that has to be 100% literal, then that means all the children of Abraham would have to do the works of Abraham, and they couldn't do any other works? Is that what
No, I'm not saying that, because a lot of even Abraham's children, like Ishmael and even Esau, they fell away and they were counted as serpent seed as well. And that wasn't physical, but
that's what I was getting at. Was that it doesn't have to literally be physical, because if they could truly be born of Abraham, like we saw Esau, but he doesn't remain in the behavior of Abraham, Isaac did, and then,
and he was the seed of promise. But again, there is a literal physical bloodline of the devil, and we are told that here in Matthew 13, which I'll read this and then we can take your questions, because I know we're quickly coming up on the end of the show. But in Matthew 13, and I would recommend people read the entire thing, because I'll just read two sections, because both of these are very important.
Okay.
Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, meaning that the children were born, then appeared the tares also. So in this story, Christ is telling us that when the children were born, the tares appeared amongst them. And so the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. We know at the end of days there's going to be a harvest, and there's going to be a separation, the righteous with the wicked. And even though, yes, that is metaphorical as well, there is still physical bloodline connections to this story, which is why, again, Christ tells us that an enemy is the reason why the tares appeared amongst the wheat. And then he goes into clarity after sending the multitude away, which we know he speaks in parables to the multitude. Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. And that's a connection to 1 John chapter 3, verse 12. Cain, who was of the wicked one, that word of there meaning son of, descendant of, or progeny of. And then continuing, the very next line, the enemy, which that's a reference back to the parable of the kingdom that we just read, the enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels. They shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And then, just to reiterate, he explains it one more time to the apostles. He says, Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea, and gathered of every kind, which when it was full drew to shore, and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And, and then, he says, have you understood all these things? They say unto him, yea, Lord. And so they finally got it. And that what Christ was alluding to is not just, again, you have good and bad people, but that there is an actual physical bloodline of the devil, and they are the murderers of the prophets, have been since the beginning, since Abel to Zacharias, which we know Zacharias was killed during his day. He was the high priest, the father of John the Baptist. And, again, the enemy that sowed them is the devil. I mean, it doesn't get clearer, in my opinion.
So, in your opinion of the texts that you've been reading to me so far, and you're putting together, if there's a physical, literal bloodline from the serpent, that is what I think you and I both agree. It's one spoken about in the Apocalypse of Abraham that is called the Azazel character.
Yes.
Okay, so
we'll go into that next show.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. And by the way, I was going to say before the end of next show, I'll present my rebuttals to you, and then you can strike them down or disagree or whatever you'd like to do. But because a lot of my audience is wondering why I'm not talking.
So we can, if you want to do a show where you bring forth all your rebuttals, that's fine, and we can talk about them then. I mean,
yeah, maybe we can do a part 3 where because if it takes you 2 parts to get through your stuff, and then I'll do a part 3 and we can have more of a rebuttal conversation. That's fine. But ultimately, so are you, with what you just read and explained, and as you're trying to drive the point home that you believe there's a literal physical bloodline, do you think that, like, if one of those Pharisees walking around during the days of Yeshua that's not mentioned in the Gospels, so it's the only 2 that we really get mentioned by name, I think, is well, there's 3. There's Caiaphas, and then there's Nicodemus, and there's Joseph of Arimathea. But there's all these other guys that are Pharisees hanging out in that crowd as well. Would it be? Yeah, he was in that. I would imagine he's in that crowd. Do you think any of those had a chance to repent, or do you fall into that hard line of if they're serpent seed, they're just doomed? That's like more of a Calvinistic teaching of predestination.
No, not at all. I think that doesn't matter which bloodline you're born into, that you have a chance to be redeemed through Christ, that he died on the cross to bring forgiveness to everybody. That's why when, John saw him, he said, behold the Lamb that takes away the sins of the world. And the world is all of us. The field is the world. There's the good and the bad seed, but all can be redeemed through Christ as Savior and Messiah.
Okay. Well, amen, brother. Amen. All right, guys, we're running to the end of the live stream tonight, and this is a lot of information to digest, and we've got I think about 138, 140 people that's been watching on average throughout this. So I really appreciate that. It's a little higher than normal, and we're going to look for a couple quick questions before we go tonight.
Yeah, let's do it.
And admins, if you have been watching those questions or collecting them, or if anyone else has come up with a new question towards the end of this, please put it in all caps, make it a clear, concise, and coherent sentence so that we can understand it and ask Zen your question. Or if you got one for me, maybe you already agree with Zen and you got a question for me, you can ask that as well. But let's see if you have any questions for our guest tonight. And let me see, I'm looking for a couple here. Let me check my personal admin mods, because I know I saw some earlier up. I think here's one. Nope, that's just a statement that they put in all caps. This is the trouble with the live streams. It's like you're always they move so fast and they don't refresh fully. So
right. That's why I'm glad my children do all that for me. I don't. It's distracting for me to try to keep up with the live stream and do a teaching.
Yeah, it really, it's sometimes I pause in between words, and that's because I'm distracted. I'm trying to multitask, and I'm not the best at it. So, all right, guys, drop questions in the chat if you have any. Otherwise, we'll get ready for part. Here go. Here's a question from NG. Thank you, David Shearer, for catching this. And it says, when were the books of Adam and Eve penned? Would you like to take that one, Zen?
In my opinion, they were penned before the antediluvian age, but of course, that will be denied by, Wikipedia and so-called professional opinion. Everybody will say that, they were written first century or second century AD or whatever. But in my opinion, again, the testaments of Adam and even Enoch are before the flood of Noah's day, and that they are messianic and that they are also prophetic, and that the testaments of so many of the patriarchs, even we have Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, in the testament of the 12 patriarchs. There's mention in the testament of the 12 patriarchs as knowing what would happen to their children, the 12 tribes, because they had read it in the books of Enoch the righteous.
Yeah.
And so, in my opinion, those particular texts show also that this information was passed down generation to generation, and that the testaments, as they are entitled, the Testament of Adam or the Testament of whoever, Enoch, that they were actually written down, maybe transcribed later, recopied, and made available in newer edition, because these were ancient scrolls, ancient writings, and certainly they had to be updated every so often in order to be able to successfully make it down to us. And it wasn't until the printing press that, we didn't have to worry about them disappearing. And so I think as they are entitled, that they date back to those particular patriarchs, those apostles, those prophets of old.
You mentioned how the information is penned and passed down, and I actually did an entire show on this about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'm going to put it on screen real quick in case you haven't seen it before. And it's called Heaven's Bible, Given to Enoch and Jacob. And that's the title of the Milk and Meat live stream that I did a few weeks ago. And I go through systematically all the scriptures that give us a timeline of how these patriarchs had received commandment from the very beginning, and they knew what righteousness was, and it wasn't a guessing game. And I'm kind of countering against that traditional teaching from Judaism that tries to claim the law only came to Moses at Mount Sinai, and before that they just had oral Torah. But no, they actually had, as you're seeing on the screen in front of you from Enoch 1:6-18-19, that Enoch is claiming to have read this stuff from the heavenly tablets. And we see in Jubilees chapter I think it's 32, he's given tablets from heaven, and much of it is with prophecy about stuff coming in the future. And it's just, I agree with you on the Testament of 12 patriarchs. They definitely acknowledge reading the book of Enoch. So does the Genesis Apocryphon. And so there is there's quite a few places to give us a good rabbit trail to follow.
I'll make one other mention. There's the book of the secrets of Moses. It's called the Stature, and in that book it speaks about Adam being, when he was banished from paradise and exiled here to the earth, that he was given 5 books, the books of creation. One of them was the book of signs, another the book of astrology, the book of the generations of man, the book of the wars of the Lord, and another the book of the law. And that it was these 5 books which he passed on to Enoch. And we see that the portions of first Enoch are associated, in my opinion, connected to what we see as remembrance of these 5 books of the books of the books of creation, which I believe that the book of the law, and also the messianic, as far as the book of Enoch chapters 40-60 are part of that. And then we see the book of astrology, the book of signs, as part of the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries. We see the book of the generations of man as being part of the dream visions, chapters 83-90 or thereabouts. And so you see all these different associations with the books of creation mentioned in this particular text as being different portions of the testament of the book of Enoch. And so that I find to be interesting as well.
Okay. Here's a question directly for you, Zen. It says, what Targum are you using and why?
I read from the King James and many other parallel Bibles as well, but I study and have a preference for the Aramaic and the Jerusalem Targum, and we have published and released those, made them easily available for the public at a very cheap cost, because I know a lot of, as far as those that have published the Targum, they publish each of the 5 books of Moshe separately, and they charge anywhere from $75 to $150 each for each one. And we provide the Targum, the Aramaic and Palestinian Targum together as one manuscript in all 5 books, and so that people can gain access to them, read them, and study them. And you can find that at sacredwordpublishing.com.
And how do you differentiate between the two targums? Do you do the bracketed kind of thing like the
Yes,
translators did?
the predominant one is the Aramaic, which dates back and is most authoritative and most well respected. And then the Jerusalem, and there's a bracket for the Jerusalem, the differentiation where there's additional or something that might be different as far as commentary. They are put there one after the other.
Okay.
With each of the different verses and each of the different books.
Okay. All right. Let me see here. Can we take 2 more questions? You got time?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
I'm no rush.
So
Take
it looks
as
like
many
we
as you
have
want.
Elias Stewart is asking a 2-part question. I think the second part we're going to get into in later, the next time we talk, right? So we'll cover the second part. The first question he wants to ask though is, had Cain's line survived the flood?
They survived through Ham, and this is part of my 13th book, I think it is. I remember I get them confused because I've written so many. But anyways, the great contest too, the enmity between the seed lines. Chapter 19 of that book is on how the serpent seed survived the flood, and in that particular chapter, it talks about how Noah was instructed to take Nama as his second wife, that the first 2 children, Japheth and Shem, that they were born of a different mother, and that Ham was born of Nama, and Nama was the sister of Tubal Cain, of the line of Cain, the daughter of Lamech. And it was specific in a book called The Writings of Abraham. It talks about how God would preserve the seed of Cain through the flood, through Nama. And because Ham had seen the nakedness of his father, meaning that he slept with his mother, that the child that was born of that was Canaan. And that's why Canaan was cursed by Noah after his birth, because he was a result of his having seen the nakedness of his father, which, because Nama was serpent seed and because Ham was serpent seed, the child Canaan was predominantly serpent seed as well. And so it is through the Canaanites that the serpent seed survived
So
and
I
were
apologize.
perpetuated through the flood.
I want to follow. I apologize if I'm not following. You said Nama was
Yeah,
serpent
Nama.
seed, and she was, and you said she was the wife of whom?
She was the sister of Tubal Cain, the daughter of Lamech, but she was the wife of Noah, the second wife of Noah.
And which book were you quoting from that talks
The
about
Writings of Abraham, and also the book of Jasher speaks about. But he actually married 2 different Namas, one from the line of Enoch, whom Shem and Japheth were born, and then the second Nama is whom Ham was born from. And so you can look to that chapter for all the quotes and all the passages that I'm. And also, if you just go to my Facebook page, in my notes section, there's an excerpt of this chapter, and you can read it there freely.
Okay,
how
so
the serpent seed
Noah's
survived the flood.
Noah's 2 wives, you're claiming perpetuated from the writings of Jasher and the writings Abraham. Yep. Okay, interesting. All right, so I'm just helping out the person asking the questions. So they have a resource to go try to, because we don't have slides. Usually I have all my scriptures on slides prepared to show where I'm getting these ideas and the quotes. So that's hopefully, Elias, that was good for you to go check out. L. Wilkins 25 is asking, if we are returning to our original state of immortality, why do we need our bodies changed into water and spirit to inherit paradise? Adam was made from earth and spirit, not water and spirit.
That's just to be born again through the Holy Spirit, and that's to become a new creature in Christ. And that has to do with redetermining our allegiance while in flesh embodiment. But we see that, when we go on to be with the Most High, that we are restored to what will be our glorified bodies. And then at the end of the age, before the great white throne judgment, our physical bodies are then brought up for judgment, and that particular determination of who shall be numbered amongst the elect of the righteous or the wicked. But again, the bright nature is what we will be restored through, and that is through Christ. But being a born again of the Holy Spirit, that just is becoming a new creature in Christ while here in flesh embodiment.
Well, I could be wrong, Elkins 25, but I think they weren't asking about the regeneration concept. I think they were asking about what you were claiming from your explanation of your Serpent teaching, which is that we were talking about the idea that Adam was born. You were saying that the second Adam in Genesis 2, or I don't know the first person, what you think the first person's name was, the hominids, but let's just go with it.
I didn't have a name.
Okay. So what you're saying that Adam in Genesis 2, that he, even though he was made of the dirt and he was taken to paradise in the third layer of the firmament, that he could live forever. And I think,
but he would have if he didn't fall.
The understanding that the question is coming from is you're saying that was a state of immortality.
Yeah.
But without a scriptural citation, I actually am familiar with what the question's asking about, the idea that we do get a spiritual body at the resurrection, and that is what allows us to actually be inside the kingdom of heaven in a perpetual nature, and even ascend above the first layer of the firmament on the day of the Lord to get away from the wrath of the Lamb. And I think that's where they're coming from, is like, how could Adam be? I think it's basically, the question is playing upon something I'd asked earlier, as far as Adam's being made, his original nature being made of dirt, and where you're saying the original placement of the garden seems to be, a lot of people might find that hard to reconcile, I guess what I'm saying, because he couldn't be there because he doesn't have an angelic style body yet.
So again, I disagree, because in my opinion, even though, yes, his body was made of dirt initially, he was given a bright nature. And it's clear in the primary Adamic literature, even the first books of Adam and Eve, you see that he was bright natured, and that it wasn't until he ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the day that ye eat thereof or touch it, you shall die. And that's exactly what happened, that when they touched it, their genitals appeared, they were placed into mortal embodiment, they were now in a fallen form, and that's why they couldn't eat from the tree of life anymore, because they were in a fallen nature, and they were cast out of the upper heavens, placed here on the earth, from paradise to the earth where the fallen angels had already been cast down. And so, that's why we are restored and redeemed by Christ, and he came to rectify the fall, because we are now in a fallen nature, in a fallen world. And that's the whole reason why he had to come into the flesh himself. He even gave to Adam a prophecy that he would be born of his particular bloodline and born of a virgin. All the prophecies of Isaiah were fulfilled because he did have to come into mortal embodiment.
Okay. All right. So we have one last question. I apologize for everyone that's asked questions that we're not going to be able to get to them tonight. Please try to hold on to them. And Zen, I know you do your weekly show next Friday, but I'd love to invite you back the following Friday for part 2, if you're willing.
Yeah, sure.
And then maybe some of the folks that couldn't get their questions in tonight, maybe they can get them in 2 weeks from now. So the last question we'll take tonight is from Miss Peggy D. She's asking, from Genesis 3:6, she saw the tree was good for food and took fruit and ate. Do you see this as literal?
Yeah, I do. She did see, again, the pleasantness, and that a tree to be desired to make one wise, and she ate of it. Their eyes were opened. And then, but we do see that there had to have been something connected with the genitals, in my opinion, because then after having eaten of this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we see that the punishments are declared, that there's going to be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, that I believe came from because of their eating and touching this tree, and that the serpent beguiled Eve after, and then Adam repeating the act with Eve, that the results were that Cain and Abel would be born, and that Eve being pregnant, she's going to have to give birth to children in sorrow. And so, the punishments are connected to that tree, and it was a literal fruit, but that because they became aware of their sexuality, that's why they covered their genitals with fig leaves and tried to hide themselves away from God, because they knew that because again, Genesis 2, verse 25, they were naked and not ashamed. But then all of a sudden, when they eat this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, something happens to where they are embarrassed and they are ashamed. And it has to do with their genitals, because they tried to hide them. And then they tried to hide themselves from God, because they know that they did exactly what he warned them not to do.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, brother. This last statement I'm putting on screen for everybody. This isn't a question to use in. This is just someone trying to make a joke, but people have asked about my background, and that it looks to have the triptych on the wall with the two chairs. And guys, that is what you're seeing behind me is my dream studios, so that in the future, as I build this ministry, I'd love to have folks like Zen Garcia live in a studio with me, so we can have these conversations in person. And so this is kind of like me, dreaming basically behind me. But so that's why it's when I'm having a discussion, even though we're doing it virtually over over video, that's the presence, the ambiance I'm trying to give us both, is that we're sitting in my imagination, we're sitting in a room together having a chat as brothers in Christ. So
right on.
All right. Thank you so much, Zen. I appreciate you, brother. And like I said, we'll connect a couple of weeks from now. I'd love to invite you back on two Fridays from now, and we can pick up where we left off, and you can continue with the points you have for part 2. And then maybe following that, we'll do a part 3 of just rebuttals back and forth. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you want to do that one next, we can do that as well, and however you want to do it. But that's fine.
Maybe we can see how long it takes to get to your other points next time.
Okay.
And if we have enough time, I'll be glad to, because mine may only take 10 minutes. So.
Okay, sure. Yeah, then we can make time and space. But yeah, I can easily do several hours more, no problem. So.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Everyone, thank you for being here in the chat with us. And remember, if you're celebrating Shabbat today, enjoy your rest, focus on the Father, and dig into his word. That's what we do on Shabbat. And we thank you for being here. And we hope that you guys would always keep all your comments loving and edifying and respectful, especially when you disagree with people. I know many of you in the chat disagree with some of the things I talk about on my channel, and so anyone that I bring onto my channel, just treat them the same way, right? Just know that we're all going through a process of learning, studying, and reading. And there's things that, 15 years ago, I didn't understand, that I would probably had disparaged my modern self today because of what I understand now after, another 15 years of reading, studying, and learning the word. So we're all on a journey of learning the word. And even if we come across folks we disagree with, we walk with them in love, as Yeshua did with everyone he came across, because he had perfect theology. Amen. And yet he interacted with love with every single, even his haters, even the people that were trying to kill him. So that's what we're called to do as well. All right, guys. All right. Yeah, Zen, I hope you have a great Shabbat, brother. And I'm not sure if you're celebrating, but because I know you do a different Shabbat, maybe that's a whole nother show we can have in the future.
Yeah,
but I appreciate you, man. We hope everyone has a great night, and we will see everyone next time.
Be blessed, all. Good night.
Bye-bye.